Marcus woke before dawn, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. He folded his thin, blanket-tan old, rough wool piece he'd found months ago into a tight roll, and laid it under his head one more time as he sat up beneath the bus. Shelter. The shelter was cracked and rusted in spots, but it gave enough cover from the occasional rain or wind. The street was silent, except for a distant rumble of garbage trucks preparing for their morning run. He rubbed his eyes and scanned the empty sidewalk, where someone had tossed an old pizza box and a few empty bottles. The city's glow in the distance promised warmth and work, but it also reminded him how far he was from home. He had once lived with his mother in a small house near the river, a place filled with laughter and cooking smells. But illness took her when he was just 12, and without relatives to turn to, Marcus had nowhere else to go. His stomach rumbled. Breakfast was not a regular meal for him, but he had learned to ignore hunger. He moved silently, gathering his few belongings: a worn backpack with ragged straps, a thin sweater with holes at the elbows, and a small notebook with half-worn pages. In that notebook, he wrote down every memory of his mother, her gentle singing, her soft hands tying his shoelaces, and the promise he made to her when she lay in the hospital bed. He promised he would help others someday if he could ever find a way. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft pink and orange, Marcus stepped onto the street and walked toward the nearest corner store. He knew the owner, Mr. Patel, who sometimes let him sweep the floor or stack shelves for a small sandwich or hot cup of tea. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. This morning, Mr. Patel greeted him with a nod. "Good morning," Marcus said softly. His voice was quiet but steady, a sign that he had learned to speak with respect, even when respect was in short supply. "Morning, Marcus. Usual?" Mr. Patel asked, his voice kind under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Marcus nodded. A broom and began sweeping, movements precise and practiced. He had done this routine almost every day for the past several months. The work filled his hands and his mind, giving him something to focus on besides the cold and loneliness. When the floor was spotless, Mr. Patel quietly handed him a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a small paper cup of steaming tea. "Thank you," Marcus said, tucking the sandwich into his backpack to save for later. I sipped the tea and felt warmth spread through his chest. He might be hungry again in an hour, but for now he felt ready to face the day. Leaving the store, Marcus walked toward the recycling center. He pushed an old shopping cart, its wheels creaky and uneven, filled with empty bottles and aluminum cans. He examined each container, flipping them over to check for refund stickers, separating the aluminum from the plastic. To most people, this was trash. To Marcus, it was money. A stack of 30 cans would earn him a few dollars at the recycling depot. It wasn't enough for a full meal, but combined with bits he earned elsewhere, he managed. On the corner, an older woman watched him sort bottles. She was dressed in a neat coat and scarf, and she held a small basket of flowers. She offered him a handful of loose change, quarters and dimes, enough for a hot meal at the diner across the street. "I see you every morning," she said kindly. I wanted to help." Marcus thanked her with a small smile and gently refused. "Thank you, ma'am, but I can't accept charity today." He knew she meant well, but pride kept him from taking money he hadn't earned. Instead, he offered to help her carry the flowers to the bus stop. She agreed, and for a few minutes, Marcus felt normal. He held the basket carefully, his fingers brushing bright petals as they walked. The woman asked about his day, and he answered in honest, simple sentences. It felt good to talk about anything other than survival. After delivering the flowers, Marcus continued on toward the depot. The sky was fully bright now, and the depot workers greeted him by name. He unloaded his cart and watched as the attendant counted the cans, 32 in total. The attendant handed him a few dollars in hand, and Marcus pocketed the bills. With a nod of thanks, he paused for a moment, looking down at the money. It wasn't much, but in his mind, it meant something precious. He thumbed the bills and thought of his next goal, to find materials for a poster board and markers. He had an idea for a small sign he wanted to make, something to advertise free tutoring sessions for neighborhood kids. He still remembered How hard school felt without anyone to explain things when he didn't understand. If he could help just one child learn to read or solve a math problem, it would matter. Marcus walked along the busy sidewalk, pushing his cart by one handle, looked at the tall glass buildings, the honking cars, and the people rushing by. Without a second glance, he knew the world saw him as invisible, someone to be avoided. But he held his head high. Each step was a statement. He was here. He existed, and he had dreams. By midday, he reached the donation store. It was cluttered inside old clothes, broken electronics, and mismatched plates. Behind the counter, a young volunteer named Tanya recognized him. She offered him a used marker set she found in a box. "For your sign," she said with a smile. "Thank you," Marcus replied, his eyes bright. He placed the markers carefully in his backpack. With that one act of kindness, the world felt a little gentler. He left the store and sat on a nearby bench to rest. His stomach growled, reminding him of the sandwich waiting in his bag. He unwrapped it and took small bites, savoring each one. The bread was a little stale, but the cheese inside melted warmly on his tongue. He felt gratitude wash over him. While he ate, other homeless people drifted by. Some nodded in greeting. Others walked past without noticing. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment and thought of his mother's voice. He imagined her laughter echoing in his ears and her gentle words telling him he could be anything he wanted. Those memories were his strength. When he finished eating, Marcus unrolled a scrap of cardboard he had found earlier and tested the markers. He wrote free tutoring in bold letters, then added math, reading, writing below. The letters were uneven, but they stood out. Against the brown cardboard, he hoped someone would see it and ask for help. He pressed the sign against his chest and set off toward the community center, a small building with peeling paint and a faded sign. Inside, the room was empty except for a single table and some chairs. Marcus arranged his sign on the table and sat down. He placed his backpack beside him and waited. An hour passed. 2 hours. No one came. The street outside grew busier, the sun beginning to dip. Marcus wondered if he was foolish to dream so big. He stared at the empty chairs and felt a familiar sting of disappointment, but he remembered his mother's voice again. She taught him that sometimes the hardest work was believing in yourself when no one else would. Just as he was about to pack up, a young boy in a tattered jacket peeked inside. He looked hesitant, but his eyes were curious. Marcus smiled and waved him in. The boy shuffled to the table and asked, "Math, sir?" "Yes," Marcus said softly, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "I'm here to help. What do you need?" The boy pulled out a crumpled worksheet and showed Marcus a row of subtraction problems. Marcus guided him through each step, drawing numbers in the margin and using simple words. The boy's face lit up when he solved the first problem. He ran his finger along the paper and said, "Thank you." Marcus felt something warm bloom inside him, pride perhaps, or hope. He realized that even in his own struggle, he could still lift others. As he packed his sign and belongings to leave, he glanced at the sky. The sun was setting, painting the buildings in gold and pink. It was time to find his shelter for the night. He wheeled his cart back to the bus shelter, the weight lighter than before. Memories of tutoring filled his mind, and he thought of more ways to help. He crawled under his thin blanket and closed his eyes, listening to the distant hum of traffic. He felt tired, but his heart was full. In the dark, he whispered a promise to himself and to his mother. One day, things would be better for all the children who needed help. And with that promise, Marcus drifted into sleep, dreaming of a world where no one was invisible and where kindness shone brighter than any city light. The rain began as a soft drizzle, growing stronger by the minute as Robert Hale steered his sleek black sedan down the quiet city streets. He glanced over at Alina, his wife of 3 years, as she sat beside him, rubbing her lower back. The last weeks of her pregnancy had grown difficult, and he had insisted on driving her to the routine checkup himself. Tonight it was late, nearly 9 o'clock, but he wanted to be there when the doctor measured their baby's heartbeat. Each visit left them filled with hope and worry, excited for the new life on the way, but nervous for any sign of trouble. Alina shivered despite her thick coat. She leaned forward to warm her hands on the vents. "I feel a bit dizzy," she said quietly. Her voice trembled, and Robert reached over to hold her hand. He slowed the car to take a better look at her through the windshield, droplets of rain obscuring his view. "I'll turn up the heater," he said, pressing a button. The warmth spread through the cabin, but Elena's cheeks remained pale. He glanced at the wet pavement glinting in the streetlights and pressed the accelerator gently, hoping to get them home quickly but safely. As they rounded a corner, the sedan's tires hit a slick patch of oil mixed with rainwater. The car skidded sideways, its headlights swinging across the concrete walls of the underpass ahead. Panic shot through Robert's chest as he fought for control, turning the wheel too sharply in one direction, then the other. Time slowed as the car drifted toward the edge of a raised platform that overlooked the fast-moving river below. Alina gasped, clutching her belly. Robert's heart pounded in his ears. He slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, but the wet pavement gave no traction. The car lurched off the road, wheels dangling over the edge for a heartbeat. Inside, the engine roared, and the world felt like it held its breath. Suddenly, with a sickening crack of metal against concrete, the front wheel slipped over the ledge. The car tilted dangerously. Alina screamed, pressing her hand to her mouth. Robert reached for the door handle, but it was jammed against the frame. He twisted and pulled, panic rising in his eyes. Turned to Alina. "Hold on," he shouted. "Hold on, please." Water from the river splashed up through a broken guardrail, drenching the underside of the car. Alina's breathing was quick and shallow. She reached for Robert, her slender fingers trembling on his arm. He squeezed her hand, fighting the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. He peered over the console into the darkness below. The river looked like a black mirror, rushing under the broken guardrail. He knew he had seconds, maybe less, to get her out. Grabbed his phone, struggling to dial emergency services through shaking fingers. The call cut off as the phone slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. He cursed under his breath, sliding down to reach it, then sat back upright, heart hammering. There was no time. He tore at his seatbelt and tossed it aside. He tried the passenger door, hitting it with his shoulder, but it refused to open. Every jolt of the car made the platform tremble. Meanwhile, Alina felt a wave of heat in her chest. She looked at her husband's pale face and knew his strength was fading. She pressed her forehead against the window, tears blurring her vision. Their unborn child kicked once, a soft flutter that made Alina cry out. She pressed her hands to her stomach, afraid for the life inside her. Then, high above them, Marcus heard the crash. He had spent the morning tutoring 2 neighborhood children, and by afternoon he had helped the community center prepare dinner for seniors. On his way back to the bus shelter, he noticed a new streetlight flicker to life near the underpass. He paused, curious, and that's when he saw the sleek sedan teetering at the edge. His heart pounded. He had never seen a car in such danger. He could hear the woman's cry through the roar of the rain. Without thinking, he dropped his worn backpack and sprinted across the slick pavement toward the underpass. His thin shoes offered little grip, but his focus was steady. He sprinted past parked trucks and a chain-link fence that marked the edge of the bridge. A flash of lightning lit the sky, and Marcus could see the car's front wheel hanging over the ledge, the other wheel spinning uselessly on wet ground. The driver's side door was dented badly from the crash, impossible to open. The passenger side was only slightly bent. He reached Elena's side first. Her eyes wide with fear, she looked at him with a mixture of shock and desperate hope. "Are you okay?" Marcus shouted over the rain, his voice strong and calm. His clothes were soaked, but he didn't feel the cold. He gripped the top of the car door and tried to pry it open. The metal frame resisted, groaning loudly. He kicked the door at the bottom, and the seal gave a little. Alina gasped with relief. "It's stuck," she said, her voice trembling. "Stay calm," Marcus said. "I'll get you out." He steadied his feet and took a deep breath. Then, with all his strength, he kicked the door again. The frozen rain made the seal stiff, but finally there was a loud snap. The door swung open just enough for him to slip inside. Alina shielded her belly as he reached for her arm. He helped her push the seat back, giving them more room. He guided her toward the open door. The ground was far below and wet, but he supported her weight as she slid out of the car, one leg then the next. Her shoes slipped on the slick pavement, but Marcus caught her elbow and held her steady. Robert scrambled across the center console and opened his door. He tried to climb out, but the car's tilt made it feel like a steep wall. Marcus heard him shout something behind him, but he kept his focus on Alina. He led her away from the damaged guardrail, pressing her back against the stone wall of the underpass. Water from the river sprayed, coated their clothes, and the wind whipped around them. Robert finally pulled himself free and rushed over, his eyes frantic. "Alina, oh my God, you're okay?" He pressed his hands to her shoulders, checking her for injuries. Alina shivered, but she was conscious and steady. She reached for Robert, and he held her close. Marcus watched, breathing hard, rain dripping from his hair. "Thank you," Robert said, turning to Marcus. His voice cracked. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." Marcus shook his head, still gripping the edge of the guardrail. "Are you both all right?" he asked, glancing at Elena's belly. "Your baby? Is the baby okay?" Alina looked at Marcus, tears in her eyes. "I think so," she said. I felt a kick. Relief washed over Marcus. He nodded, but his clothes were soaked through, and he realized he was freezing. He glanced at the broken guardrail, the rush of water below, and felt his legs tremble. Robert noticed and reached out to steady him. "Come away from the edge," Robert said, urgency in his voice. "I'll help you." Marcus let Robert guide him to safer ground. Behind them, the water rushed and the car teetered, but the immediate danger had passed. Alina held Marcus's hand. "You saved us," she said softly. "Thank you." Marcus's voice caught in his throat. He looked down at his boots, caked in mud. I just did what I could," he said. "I heard you, and I couldn't leave." "You there?" Robert watched Marcus carefully. He noticed the boy's worn coat, the patched elbows, the thin shoes. He realized the young man who risked his life had nothing but the clothes he stood in. Robert's chest tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wallet. He opened it, counting bills until he had a stack of $100 notes. "Take this," Robert said, pressing the stack into Marcus's hand. "I want to help you." Marcus stared at the bills. He had never held so much money in his life. He shook his head, voice quiet. "Can't," he said. "I didn't do it for money." Robert's eyes filled with tears. He frowned, frustrated. "You saved my wife and my child. Of course you deserve something." Marcus looked from Robert to Alina. He unclenched his hand, letting the bills fall to the ground without touching them. His eyes shone with a mix of courage and sadness. He thought of the shelter where he slept, of the hungry children he hoped to help one day. He swallowed and straightened his shoulders. "I don't want money," he said. "I want people to remember kids like me, to help them find safe places to sleep, to teach us in school when we need it. That's what matters." Alina reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. She dabbed her eyes, then stepped close to Marcus. "Tell me what you need," she said. "I can do more than just give you money." In the glare of the underpass lights, Marcus looked at the couple, one who had everything, and the other who had almost nothing. He felt a strange calm settle in his chest, realized that in one moment of crisis, he held the power to change. More than just his own life. He took a deep breath and met their eyes. "I want to help kids like me," he said. "Will you help me make a place where homeless children can learn and sleep safely? A place with good food and books and teachers?" "Who care?" Robert and Alina stood silent, rain dripping from their coats. The river roared below, but in that moment, the world felt quiet. Robert swallowed hard, tears rolling down his cheeks. Reached out and took both Marcus's hands in his own. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, we will help you." And as they stood there, soaked and trembling, a new promise was born, one that would change all their lives forever. The next morning, sunlight filtered through high windows in the hospital corridor. Marcus sat on a hard plastic chair, his legs stretched out and his thin sweater still damp from the night's rain. He watched as nurses wheeled stretchers past, their shoes clicking on polished floors. He felt both nervous and excited. Last night had been a whirlwind of fear and action. But now he wondered what would come next. A young doctor appeared at the end of the hall. She held a clipboard and smiled at Marcus. "You must be Marcus," she said gently. "Mrs. Hale is awake and asking for you." Marcus nodded. He slid off the chair and followed her down the hall. When he entered the room, Alina lay propped up by pillows, her face pale but peaceful. Robert stood at her side, holding her hand. A small bassinet with his new baby lay nearby. The baby was wrapped in a soft blanket, sleeping quietly with a little rise and fall of its chest. "Alina," Marcus said softly. She turned her head, and her eyes lit up at the sight of him. Robert motioned for Marcus to come closer. "You saved us," Alina said, her voice still weak. "And now our baby is safe because of you." Alina pointed to the bassinet. "He's right here." Marcus looked down and saw a tiny face, eyes closed, small fist curled. He felt tears prick at his eyes. Robert stepped forward. "We can never thank you enough." He offered Marcus a small paper bag with coffee and a sandwich. "He must be hungry." Marcus accepted the food, his hands trembling slightly. He sat on a plastic chair by the window and nibbled the sandwich. It tasted warm and familiar. He watched as Alina reached out a finger toward the baby and whispered, "Welcome to the world." After a moment, Robert asked, "Would you like to hold him?" Marcus stood, startled. He hadn't planned to touch the baby, but Alina's eyes were kind. Hughes took the small bassinet closer and lifted the baby in a soft sling. Marcus knelt, raising his hand with careful fingers. The baby stirred and settled against Marcus's chest, his head resting in Marcus's palm. Marcus felt a warmth spread. Through him, he realized that life, fragile and new, depended on kindness and courage, the very gifts he had given. When the baby yawned, Marcus smiled. He looked up at Robert and Alina. "He's beautiful," he said softly. Alina reached for Marcus's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus nodded, unsure what to say. The room was quiet except for the baby's breathing and the faint beeping of monitors. Later that morning, a small group arrived. A social worker named Ms. Lang, a reporter from the city newspaper, and Mr. Patel, the corner store owner. They filled the room with soft voices. The reporter had a notebook and pen. "Marcus," she began, "can you tell me how you felt when you saw the car?" Marcus looked at Robert, who nodded. He took a steady breath. "I saw a woman in trouble. I had to help." His voice was calm. The reporter wrote down his words, her eyes bright with respect. After the interview, Ms. Lang spoke to Marcus in private. She had kind eyes and a gentle tone. "There are programs that can help you," she said. "We can find you a place to stay, a way to finish school. Would you like that?" Marcus thought of the bus shelter and the lonely nights. He thought of the tutoring sign he had made and the children who came for help. He realized that his life could change, that he could use this chance to help others even more. He nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. Ms. Lang smiled. "Good, we will set up a meeting at my office. We'll talk about housing, school, and your idea for a special learning center." Marcus felt hope bloom in his chest. He thanked her. By noon, the hospital room felt crowded. Visitors came to congratulate the Hales and to thank Marcus. Robert whispered to Marcus, "Let's go home and talk." Alina agreed, tired but happy. Marcus stood, balancing the baby in his arms as he followed them out of the room. Outside, rain clouds gathered again, and the wind carried a chill. Robert hailed a black SUV parked by the entrance. He opened the rear door for Alina and the baby. Then he paused and turned to Marcus. "Come with us," he said. "We have a place ready for you tonight." Marcus's eyes widened. He had not expected an invitation like this. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Looking from Robert to Alina, she smiled and nodded. Inside the SUV, the air was warm and smelled faintly of new leather. Alina passed the baby back to Robert. Marcus sat beside her in black leather seats. He watched the city blur past the windows. He thought of the bus shelter and the cardboard sign. Now he was being driven through the streets as part of a family. He felt both strange and grateful. After a 20-minute ride, the SUV pulled into a gated driveway of a large house. The front lawn was green and neatly trimmed. White columns framed the entryway. Marcus stepped out onto smooth stone and looked. Up at the house, it was the first time he had seen such a home from the inside. Swallowed hard. Inside, the foyer was bright and open. A grand staircase curved upward. Paintings hung on the walls, portraits of family members, landscapes of distant places. A maid greeted them and took the baby. She cooed softly and walked away. Robert led Marcus down a long hallway to a study. The room had tall bookshelves filled with books of every size and color. A large mahogany desk stood in the center, papers neatly stacked. A fireplace crackled softly, warming the room. Robert closed the door behind them, turned to Marcus. "I want to talk about your idea." He offered Marcus a cup of hot chocolate. Marcus accepted, feeling the warmth seep into his hands. Then he set the cup on a small table and took a deep breath. He told them about the community center. He described the empty chairs, the single child who came to learn. He explained how many boys and girls like him had no safe place to sleep, no one to help with homework, no food they could count on. He spoke calmly, using simple words. He told them about the promise he made to his mother. With each sentence, he grew more confident. He saw Robert's eyes fill with resolve and Elena's hands clench in agreement. When Marcus finished, there was silence. Then Robert stood and crossed to the bookshelves. He ran his hand along the spines of the books as if drawing strength from them. He turned back. "We will build this center together," he said. "I will provide the funds. Elena and I will oversee it. You will be our partner." Marcus felt his heart swell. He remembered the night he refused money and asked for help for others instead. Now that request was becoming real. Elena stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. "We will find a building, hire teachers, and serve meals. No child will be alone." Her voice was soft but firm. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. He nodded. Over the next hour, they made plans. They agreed to meet Ms. Lang next week to discuss permits and to visit empty buildings near the community center. Robert sketched out a budget, writing numbers on paper and explaining how they would cover rent, staff wages, and supplies. Elena spoke about finding volunteers from her women's charity group. Marcus added ideas for after-school programs, sports activities, and art classes. They spoke like a team, each idea building on the last. As the meeting ended, Robert stood and offered his hand. "Welcome to the team," he said. Marcus clasped his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. Then Elena hugged Marcus warmly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Marcus left the study with a head full of plans and a heart full of hope. He walked down the marble hallway, noticing the sunlight slipping through stained glass windows. The maid brought him to a guest room, prepared with fresh sheets, a warm blanket, and a small desk. He placed his backpack on the bed and sat, looking out the window at the garden below. "I thought of the children waiting at the community center, the empty chairs, the promise of a safe place." He opened his notebook and wrote new notes. "Visit Ms. Lang. Fine building. Hire teachers, arrange food. Paint walls bright." Each line was a step toward change. As he wrote, he felt something inside him settle. He realized that this helping others was his purpose. He closed the notebook and lay down on the bed. His body was tired, but his mind buzzed with possibility. That night, Marcus slept under a soft blanket in a real bed, dreaming of laughter echoing in a warm room, filled with children, learning and playing. He dreamt of lights shining on their faces, of meals shared at long tables, and of hope growing in every heart. And when he awoke the next morning, he knew that no matter how hard things had been, he had found a family and a mission. The world felt bigger now, but he was ready to meet it one kind act at a time. Marcus awoke early, sunlight spilling through the curtains of his new guest room. The house was quiet, but his mind buzzed with ideas for the learning center. He dressed quickly in the clothes he had brought and went downstairs to find Robert. In the study, already reviewing blueprints, Lena sat at the table, sipping tea, her hair pinned neatly back. "Good morning, Marcus," said softly. Robert looked up, smiling. "Morning," Robert replied. "I've got some news." We found an old warehouse near the community center. It's empty and needs work, but it has large windows and plenty of room. Marcus's eyes lit up. He remembered the empty chairs he'd set up at the center, waiting for students. That's perfect, he said. We can turn it into classrooms and a play area. Alina handed him a cup of hot cocoa. We thought you might like that, she said. Marcus accepted it gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. He sipped and laid out his notebook on the desk. On the page were bullet points from last night. Find building. Meet Ms. Lang. Hire teachers. Arrange food. Paint walls bright. Let's visit the warehouse today, Marcus suggested. Robert nodded and picked up his car keys. Lena stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. Together they climbed into the SUV. The warehouse stood on a quiet street lined with old brick buildings. Its windows were dusty, and the paint on the walls was peeling. Marcus felt his heart flutter, climbed the metal stairs to the entrance and pushed open the heavy door. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight. The floor was cracked in places, and broken pallets lay scattered. Wow, Marcus whispered. He walked forward, stepping over debris. He imagined dividing the space with low walls for classrooms, a corner with beanbag chairs for reading, and an open area for art projects. He could almost see children sitting on colorful mats, listening to a teacher's story. Alina and Robert joined him, following his gaze. Robert pulled out his phone and took pictures, while Alina ran her hand along the rough concrete wall. We'll take work, Alina said, but I can see it already. Marcus led them through the warehouse, pointing out where windows could be cleaned, where lights could hang, and where a small kitchenette could go. He spoke in simple, clear sentences, but his words painted a vivid picture. Robert nodded after each suggestion and added notes on his phone. By noon, they had a plan. Robert promised to hire a contractor to fix the roof and install new lights. Alina offered to gather volunteers from her charity group to help clear out the pallets and sweep the floors. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. He had come so far from the bus shelter, and now he was planning a real building for children like him. That afternoon, they met with Ms. Lang at the community center. She had already prepared papers for the lease agreement and zoning permits. Marcus signed his name with a steady hand, imagining the first day of classes. Ms. Lang assured them the paperwork would take a week or two, and she promised to follow up daily. Walking back through the center's courtyard, Marcus saw the two children he had tutored earlier, scrubbing desks nearby. Their arms were tired, but they smiled and waved at him. He waved back and felt a surge of happiness. Soon, the desks would move into the new warehouse, ready for more students. Back at the mansion, Marcus packed his backpack and prepared to leave for the day. He had to return to the community center to work with Tanya, the volunteer who ran the donation store. They needed to sort books and school supplies for the new center. He hugged Robert and Alina goodbye, promising to meet them tomorrow for the first building inspection at the donation store. Tanya greeted him warmly. She led him to a back room piled high with boxes. On each box was a label: math textbooks, reading books, art supplies. Marcus opened a box labeled notebooks and pens and found rows of spiral notebooks, pencils, and erasers. He arranged them neatly on a table, organizing by subject and age group. Tanya joined him, placing colorful folders beside the notebooks. This is going to help so many kids, Tanya said, smiling. Marcus nodded. He thought of the boy who had come for help in part 1 and of the empty chairs waiting in the warehouse. He felt determined to fill each seat. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. Volunteers arrived at the warehouse each morning, armed with brooms, paint rollers, and cleaning supplies. Marcus led the group, showing them which walls to paint bright: yellow or sky blue. He climbed a ladder to reach a high corner and rolled paint across the cement. He felt paint on his clothes and drips on his hands, but he didn't mind. Each stroke of color felt like hope. Robert visited in the afternoons, checking progress with the contractor. The roof was fixed, the windows replaced, and new lights installed. Alina brought sandwiches and juice for everyone at lunchtime. Sat with the volunteers, laughing as they chatted about their lives. Marcus joined in, telling stories of the tutoring sessions and of his mother's promise. The volunteers listened and asked questions, and he felt part of a team. One morning, while painting the play area orange, Marcus heard a soft voice behind him. "May I help?" He turned to see the older woman from part 1, the one who had offered him change. She held a bag of cleaning rags and wore a gentle smile. "I thought you might need more help," she said. Marcus felt gratitude. "Thank you," he replied. Together, they swept the floor and wiped down tables. She asked about the center and nodded at his plans. "This is wonderful," she said. "Your mother would be so proud." Marcus paused, touched by her words. He knew she understood loss and kindness, and that bond made him smile. By the end of the week, the warehouse looked almost new. Walls, clean floors, tables and chairs lined up neatly. A small bookshelf held the donated books. A colorful sign above the entrance read Hope Learning Center. Marcus stood in the center of the main room, arms outstretched, as if to embrace every corner. Robert and Alina arrived to inspect the progress. They walked through the rooms, nodding in approval. The contractor gave his final report. The building was safe, the permits approved, and power ready to turn on. Robert shook the contractor's hand and whispered, "You did good work." Alina turned to Marcus, her eyes shining. "It's perfect," she said. Marcus felt tears well up. He looked at the empty classrooms, imagining chairs filling with children. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside. He opened the front door to see a small line of children, backpacks slung over their shoulders, waiting quietly. They had heard about the center and came early on the first day. Marcus's heart hammered. He motioned them inside. The children hesitated, looking at the bright walls and the shelves of books. He gave each child a gentle smile. "Welcome," he said. "This is your new learning center." The children's faces lit up. One by one, they sat at desks, running their fingers across the smooth tops. Another picked up a book and flipped through the pages eagerly. Robert and Alina watched. From the doorway, Alina whispered, "Look at their faces." Robert nodded, blinking back tears. He stepped forward and knelt to Marcus's level. "You did this?" he said softly. "You made this happen." Marcus felt warmth fill him. He knelt beside the children and said, "What would you like to learn first?" A shy girl raised her hand. "Can we read a story?" she asked. Marcus smiled and took a picture book from the shelf. He sat in the reading corner, with the children gathered around. He read slowly, using different voices for each character. The children laughed at a clown's silly face and gasped at a princess's adventure. Marcus felt like his mother was there, listening, proud of him. After story time, the children moved to other corners. Some worked on simple math problems at tables, and Tanya guided them through subtraction. Others colored in art books on a low table, paint pots carefully lined up. In the play area, a small group built towers with blocks. The room buzzed with excitement and chatter. At lunchtime, Robert and Alina served sandwiches and fruit from the kitchenette. The children sat at a long table, eating and talking. Marcus joined them, sharing peanut butter sandwiches with two boys who had never tried that before. They smiled up at him, grateful. Later, as the sun began to set, parents arrived to pick up their children. They thanked Marcus and the volunteers. One mother said, "I've never seen my son so happy about school." Another said, "This place is a blessing." Marcus watched the families leave, hand in hand, their faces relaxed. When the children and families were gone, the room grew still. Marcus sat on a desk, looking around. Paint dripped slightly in one corner, and a pencil lay on the floor. It was perfect not because it was flawless, but because it was full of life. He felt tired but fulfilled. Robert and Alina joined him. They sat quietly for a moment. Finally, Robert spoke. "Marcus, you turned your promise into action." He paused. "I cried a little today, watching those kids." Marcus nodded, understanding. He reached out and took Robert's hand. Alina hugged him gently. Outside, the sky had darkened. The streetlights shone on the warehouse windows, making the bright walls glow. Marcus thought back to the nights under. The bus shelter, to the empty chairs at the community center, to the car crash that changed everything. He realized that every step, every struggle had led him here. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Then he opened them and said, "Tomorrow we'll start lessons in reading and math. Next week, art. And soon we'll add music. This is just the beginning." His voice was firm, gentle, full of hope. As they left the warehouse, Marcus looked back at the sign, Hope Learning Center. He knew the first morning sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the Hope Learning Center as Marcus unlocked the door. He paused for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of new beginnings. Yesterday's excitement had been a whirlwind. Children laughing over art, parents' relieved smiles, and the soft announcement of classes starting tomorrow. Today felt calm and full of promise. Marcus set down his backpack and smoothed the bright yellow walls with a gentle hand, remembering the long hours they spent painting every corner. He checked the tables and chairs, all in neat rows, and placed a small vase of wildflowers picked earlier from the front yard in the teacher's desk. A colorful chalkboard behind the desk listed the day's lessons, reading, math, and music. Pencil shavings lay on the floor from volunteers testing new sharpeners, and Marcus smiled, imagining little hands eager to learn. Outside, Lena arrived with fresh pastries and coffee. She carried a tray in one hand and baby Arthur in the other. The baby, now 2 days old, gurgled softly as Marcus greeted him. Lena handed Marcus a warm croissant and set the coffee down. "Congratulations," she whispered. "Our family is growing, and so is this place." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He thought back to the night he rescued her and the baby on the underpass. Realizing how much their lives had intertwined, Robert pulled up in the SUV, dressed in a neat suit despite the early hour. He stepped out and ruffled Arthur's hair gently, before shaking Marcus's hand. "Ready for day 2? He asked, smiling. Marcus took a sip of coffee and glanced at the empty room. "More than ever," he said. Volunteers began to arrive. Tanya with boxes of new workbooks, Ms. Lang with paperwork for new registrations, and the older woman who helped paint carrying bags of fresh fruit for snack time. Each person greeted Marcus with warmth and gratitude. He directed them to set up snack tables and prepare teaching areas. Then he found a quiet corner and opened his notebook. He wrote new ideas. Music class. Find a piano keyboard. Field. Trip library visit. Volunteer sign-up sheet. Soon children began to trickle in with parents holding their hands. Marcus knelt to their level, greeting each by name. Some children clutched their new backpacks. Others held handmade signs, reading, "Thank you." A little girl in pigtails ran up to Marcus and hugged his leg. "I miss school," she said softly. Marcus smiled and lifted her onto a chair. "We'll have a great day," he promised. The first lesson began with reading. Marcus stood before the chalkboard and asked, "Who wants to read first?" A shy boy raised his hand, voice trembling as he sounded out the first sentence. Elsa nodded encouragingly, and the boy's confidence grew with each word. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, and the boy beamed. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. Next came math. Tanya and 2 volunteers guided small groups through counting games and simple subtraction puzzles. The children worked with bright plastic counters and laughed when they discovered patterns. Marcus walked among them, offering help and high fives. He paused by a girl who had struggled yesterday, gently guiding her hand as she counted blocks. Her eyes lit up when she solved the last problem. "I did it," she exclaimed. Marcus smiled and nodded. "You did." Mid-morning, the children moved to the play area for a music lesson. Robert had surprised them by bringing a small keyboard. Marcus showed the children how to press different keys to make sounds. At first, it was chaotic notes clashing in odd rhythms, but soon, with guidance from a music teacher volunteer, they played a simple melody together. Laughter filled the room as they learned to work as a team, each child responsible for one note in the sequence. When the tune finished, they clapped and danced with joy. At snack time, the older woman distributed fruit and water bottles while Marcus stood back, watching the children chat and share. He caught sight of Mr. Patel from the corner store, arriving with bagels he had baked early that morning. Mr. Patel waved and joined the snack line, saying quietly to Marcus, "I'm happy to help." Marcus nodded, heart warmed by each act of kindness that had helped build this place. By noon, parents returned to pick up their children. They crowded the doorway, offering thanks and hugs. One mother said, "My son hasn't spoken so happily about school in months." Another father patted Marcus's shoulder. "You've given my daughter a reason to smile again," Marcus felt. Tears pricked his eyes, but blinked them back, overwhelmed by the impact of his work. After the last child left, the room grew quiet. Marcus sat at the teacher's desk, flipping through his notebook. He wrote evening meeting, discuss field trips, and enrollment. Then he closed it and leaned back in the chair, letting out a long breath. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Robert and Alina. "You did it," Alina said softly, smiling. "They're happy here?" Robert nodded, then sat beside. "Marcus, look at what you've built," he said. "From a promise in a notebook to a real place of learning." Marcus swallowed, looking at the empty chairs and silent desks. He could still hear the laughter in his mind. "I couldn't have done it alone," he replied. "Everyone helped." Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how to make this center sustainable." He slid the envelope across the desk to Marcus. Inside were plans for a scholarship fund, a trust to pay for teachers' salaries, supplies, and building maintenance. For the next 5 years, Marcus looked up stunned. "Why?" he whispered. Robert's eyes were bright. "'Cause you asked not for money for yourself, but for others, and I intend to honor that promise." Marcus closed his eyes and nodded, felt both humbled and proud. He thought of his mother's gentle hands and her promise to help others. He whispered a thank you into the still air of the room. That evening, Marcus returned to the mansion. He walked through the familiar hallways to the guest room. That had become his sanctuary. He sat on the edge of the bed, opening the notebook one last time. He wrote a new entry. Day 2 at Hope Learning Center. Success. Plans. Library field trip. Music recital. He paused, pen hovering. Then he wrote, "Thank you to everyone who believed in me." He closed the notebook and placed it on the bedside table. The moonlight shone through the window, casting soft patterns on the floor. He lay back under the blanket, exhaustion and fulfillment mingling in his mind. Before closing his eyes, he whispered to himself, "Kindness changed my world. We'll keep paying it forward." In the days that followed, the Learning Center grew busier. Word spread through the community, and more children arrived each morning. Volunteers signed up by the dozen. Local businesses donated supplies. A reporter from the city paper returned to write a follow-up story, calling the center a beacon of hope. Marcus read the article, smiling at the words. A young homeless boy's courage gave birth to a place where every child can learn, grow, and dream. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus stood before a small stage, set up in the center's play area. Parents, teachers, and volunteers gathered to celebrate the first class's graduation. Children wore simple caps they had made themselves and carried certificates of achievement. Marcus looked out at the crowd, his heart bursting. He remembered the empty bus shelter and the first child who came to learn. Now there were dozens of smiling faces, ready for the next chapter. He stepped to the microphone. His voice was clear and steady. "Today, we celebrate courage, kindness, and hope," he said. "This center exists because someone believed in us, because one act of help led to many, and because together we can build a brighter future." Applause filled the air. Marcus closed his eyes, tears of gratitude pooling. He felt his mother's presence with him. Her promise fulfilled, as the sun set behind the windows. Coloring the walls in gold and pink, Marcus joined the children in tossing their caps. The caps fluttered in the air like bright hopes, each one a promise of possibility. And in that moment, Marcus knew that his journey from a boy sleeping beneath a bus shelter to a leader guiding his community was only the beginning. The world was wide and kindness would lead the way, one child at a time,